Hello and welcome to another edition of Localized Miami. I'm your host, Robert Ruano, and today we have a special guest, like always, former Congressman Joe Garcia. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to create content, as they say. Especially for old people like you and I, creating content.
Thank you for acknowledging
It's better than us, looking in the mirror and doing it ourselves.
Yes, you have been creating a lot of content recently.
I try to. The monster needs to be fed, and we no longer have the standard ways of doing it. And a lot of people do not understand that we no longer live in a sort of media-controlled environment. You've got to create your own message. You've got to make sure how it resonates, and you've got to create a platform for others to take that message. And the other day, there's a great New York Times story about precisely that a modern candidate cannot see himself. The idea of a press conference, which I'm old enough to remember how press conferences are, and I've done my share of them. But in today's world, the press conference no longer has the same effect. You have to create your own press opportunity, and you have to create a content. You have to film that content, then you have to take that content and cut it up, and then feed it to the algorithm and see if it likes you or not. And
and speaking of, are you creating a lot of content yourself and cutting it up, or you have folks that are doing it, or
what I find is that authenticity is important. And I when I create my own content, it's a little bit tougher. I feel more comfortable. For example, this event that we're doing, there's going to be something we're going to say that people who follow me like. And I'm going to take that, I'll cut it up into a 30, 40, 80-second segments. I'll put a little bit of music in it. I may flip back and forth with a picture or something. And I will be able to get that message through, and it comes out better than if, me directly looking at camera or, just giving a lecture to someone. I think it has more power. And so I tend to do a lot more of that. There's a lot of different outlets today. And I'll give you the example of the failure, right? So the Miami Herald, right? So I've been working around this story of the port, right? And part of the problem our city has is we don't have a common scorecard. Whether you like the Miami Herald like I do, or hate the Miami Herald like many people
You like the Herald now?
Oh, I have a lot of problems with the Herald now, but I know the role that it used to play, and it's important because it's the playbill, right? It's who's on first. Why they're there, you have to figure out for yourself. The Herald may have their own angle of it, but we don't have a playbill to the city anymore. And so it makes mistakes much easier. It makes the ability of people to be profoundly ignorant or pretend to be ignorant about issues or miss them completely. And the Miami Herald played this role where it was, as you well know, you've been in radio, you've done radio. I mean, Cuban radio, for all of its mystique, was literally picking up the Miami Herald in the morning and reading the story backwards, right? Like what they said, I say this, right? But the Herald was this common scorecard or playbill. And that playbill is quickly disappearing. And then you'll have someone like Elaine Del Valle, who's breaking very important stories. And, she's a small operation. She's an investigative journalist, and she's doing her thing. Or you've got, when we become part of a national story, like the New York Times, or in this case, the Wall Street Journal, but you no longer have the capacity to have it all on one page where we can sort of signal each other the important things. And in this sort of multimedia environment, I think a lot, until it solidifies, we don't know where this is going to go. We're at the end of something that you and I lived, you and I perhaps lived the glorious age of newspapers, right? That literally, hell, I couldn't have a bowel movement unless I was holding a Herald, right? And so it's an important part of how we processed information, at least those of us who are in some leadership capacity. I remember when I was Florida Public Service Commissioner, I would have a staffer go down to the newsstand in downtown Tallahassee and buy a Miami Herald, which came in at about 1 p.m, but I needed my Miami Herald, right? Because I was from Miami, and I thought, and I it was the best paper in the state, and so I needed it. And in today's world, when you're holding the Herald, you're reading yesterday's news with tomorrow's date, which you could have seen on the internet 4 days before that. And so, you have a very different ambit for politicians, which is where I started. Not that I'm a politician anymore, but that people who run for office have to be trained on this because it's, it doesn't work anymore.
It's completely changed. And you make a great point. As a matter of fact, and you can get it after this. We do a 30-minute show, but we also cut it up. We do several shorts and we share it that way. And that gets the most
of course.
looks because you get something that's important.
No, now the most watched medium in the country, I think, is The Daily by the New York Times, right? In terms of something podcast that's produced. It's the most. But I remember when The Daily didn't even have commercials, right? Because you couldn't sell it to anyone, and it was free, and everyone could get it. Now you've got to pay to get it. But the power that has, it's a concentration because all the smaller parts, or Key Biscayne, they're doing this very interesting project where the Knight Foundation is funding all these journalists, these retired journalists that write for I think it's the Key Biscayne Islanders, a little newspaper there, which is similar to Community News, but it's a smaller paper there. And you've got these really good journalists writing these stories about, people curbing their dogs and stuff. But it's a fascinating thing because and I've looked at it as a business model to enter newspapers and radio, and it's really tough because the medium is disappearing. Radio is, used to, the power that radio used to have was incredible. Today, it's just not there. And television, right? People say, well, he was on TV for 30 years. And you ask who replaced him. And nobody has a clue because they didn't know he was doing it either. So my case in point, I don't have local TV, right?
I don't either.
In my cable. So, and the idea of watching local news, I mean, I get it on the internet. If tonight someone interviewed me at lunch today, I assume I'm going to catch it somewhere, but it's certainly not going to be watching the 6 o'clock news. Then again, my parents sit there religiously. They try to get home at 6 to watch the local and then the national
Both
news.
Your parents are still alive?
Both, thank God.
Great. How old?
They are 82. They're both 82.
Nice. Well, shout out to my mom who turned 90 today.
Nice.
90.
Nice.
That's great. I lost my father 6 years ago, but my mother turns 90 today.
Well, that's great. Well, mine are still hanging in there, and I live near them.
Good.
So I see them almost every day.
They live
for
on the
breakfast.
beach?
They live on the beach. So you live a few blocks up from me.
So let me back up here because some people may not know you, although you're a well-known figure around town. Former Congressman Joe Garcia, former chair of the Public Service Commission.
Correct.
Anybody who doesn't like putting 305 in front of their number, you can blame this guy, right?
I'll tell you a good story about that.
Tell me about that. And then I'll go back to what I was going to say.
When we were doing the 305, I don't know if you know this, but in Tallahassee, Miami is like the joke to all of them. I mean, even though we pay more taxes than all these bastards, we are the joke of Tallahassee. Sure. Every time they do a play, every time they do a skit, every time they make some fun of some place, it's Miami. The craziness of Miami. Oh yeah, it scares the hicks up there. So when this 305 issue came, the whole idea was we're going to take 305 and give it to Broward, and then Dade County get a brand new number, but they'll get 10-digit dialing. And I said, why? First off, I like Pitbull. And I was from Miami. I was the only one that was not from the Tallahassee area. And I said, no, this is our number. And anyway, so I have a huge fight. And I get the we go to 10-digit dialing. And the reason we have, I'll explain that in a second. But anyway, that's done, right? And, I lived in Miami the whole time. So I had to fly back and forth at my own expense. But, as my ex-wife used to say, when you find proof of there's a city there, I'll move there. In our high-handed Miami, we got to be high hat back to Tallahassee.
Sure.
And one day I get on the plane and a guy sits next to me, and he's pissed off about the 10-digit dialing, and so he starts talking about it. He has no idea who I am, and he says this 10-digit dialing that's ridiculous. All they had to do was just the new people would just dial the 10 digits. And, I go through, listen, there's an FCC order. The FCC order doesn't let you do this and this and this, and there's a problem with, well, then what you should have done is this. And I said, well, the problem is that old PBXs can't handle a number without a 0 or 2. And I don't know if you noticed, but 786 spells son.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, never noticed.
And so I go through each point that the guy had. And the guy, at the end of the call, he said, listen, dude, let me guess, you work at the Public Service Commission? He said, yeah. And he said, well, let's be honest. It's that jerk, Joe Garcia, is on the commission. I said, pleasure to meet you, sir. It's and of course, because, it's just one of these things that, local is important, right? And I think it's one of the things that as the media pulls away and becomes much bigger in the way it attracts things, that we lose that local touch. And I think when you see the legislature sort of doing zoning laws to help and favor local developers who go to Tallahassee, and as bad as local government can be, it is closer to the voter than the state government, and certainly closer than the federal government where I served. That distance does not create familiarity. It creates profound ignorance, and it gives those with power and money the ability to subvert the law. Yeah. And I'm a big believer that the more democracy, the better, and the more local that democracy is. It has problems, but I think people have to be involved locally in making decisions.
Yeah. No, I agree. And actually I keep saying it all the time. That's part of why I started this show with local folks and talking about local issues, because a lot of people didn't even know what was going on or who their mayor was or what their government was. But I do want to go through, because you have a very interesting, and I've known you quite a bit. Do you remember where we met?
No, but I remember you asked me to serve on Regis House Board of Directors.
You were on our board, yes.
And
you were on our board for a little bit.
Father Perez Lerena, who, had his charisma removed at birth, but he was a great man.
Great guy.
And he'd been our my principal at Belen when I was there.
Well, it's I know you were at Belen. Well, it's a good thing you don't remember, because you will remember after I say it, because we went to UM together.
Well, no, I did. I just didn't want to bring up epic disasters on your part, right?
Yeah, I was in the part of the other team. You were in the super party, right?
Yes.
When you won for president?
I won. You were very close to Javier Cortada.
Xavier was sitting right there a couple months ago.
Yeah, no, Xavier is a good friend and an artist, and Xavier and I were in student government together, and
I was there too.
Yeah.
Fraternity Row
Senator. You were a part of Lambda Chi, and
that's right.
And I remember all that.
Yeah. But I wanted to tell you one thing. I don't know if you remember this, but my first kind of foray into politics, you showed up, because it was on 8th Street when Raul Masvidal was running for mayor, and they had a job opening for an assistant. And you came in, you were like a junior or senior. I was a lowly sophomore. And we both went in, and you found out that the job was for minimum wage. And you're like, oh, I'm not going to take minimum wage. And I was like, I'll take it. So I ended up working for Raul Masvidal for a summer, which was a very interesting.
Oh, no, Raul was a very smart guy. And a very plugged-in guy. He had a tremendous vision for the city and for what he wanted to do. And I always didn't have a particularly close relationship, but he was a much bigger player than his history would tell you. He'd been involved with a lot of things.
Sure.
And as a banker, he was one of the early successful local Cuban American bankers, and a lot of people saw him as a guy on the way, right? Other politics got in the way, but very smart guy.
Yeah. So let me tell you, and so though you were, people probably don't know this, that very early on after college, you were part of the Cuban American National Foundation with Mascanosa.
Correct.
And that's how you got involved.
My second job out of UM, before I went to law school, was running the Cuban Exodus Relief Fund. And it's the best job I ever had. I was processing refugees for Jorge Mas and Pepe Hernandez. And I mean, you must remember Jorge Mas's son was in college with us.
I didn't know him.
J.C. Mas. He was head of the, it's a funny story because J.C. is very close to me for many years. And J.C. was the president of the Federation of Cuban Students, right? This Cuban Student Club. And he had he came to me, and I didn't know who he was, but he said, "Hey, do you have any suggestions? Because the group is kind of, it's not strength, and wanted to get it stronger." And I said, "Listen, I don't know. There's this guy, Jorge Mascanosa, who I don't know who he is, but God damn it, he's in the paper every week. That guy." And I didn't know that was JC's father, right?
Wow.
And so he told me, and years later, Jorge Mas had this rule that his kids had to be home on Sunday, right? And he made an obligation to the family that he wouldn't leave on Sunday, so they had to be, and it was a family day. And so, 3 boys, right? Jorge Mas, JC, and Jose, who now is the president of the company. Jorge is the chairman, and JC runs a lot of the outside operations of the family and some of the family office stuff. And so JC would call me and say, "Hey, if you're not doing anything, come hang out with us." And so, we weren't allowed to leave the house. But on one of those occasions, the father said, "Listen, I want you to come to this big party I'm having." And I was like thrilled. I was student body president. Jorge Mas asked me to come to this event. And when I got there, he handed me a valet jacket. He said, "You're parking the cars." But, true to his word, when we finished parking the cars, he sat us at the table, and, we were there with Tad Foote, who was president of UM, and several other people. And, but I developed a relationship. The father loved playing basketball, and obviously the Mosses aren't tall. Not that I'm tall, but I'm tall for a Cuban.
You're tall,
for a Cuban. I'm Wilt Chamberlain for a Cuban in terms of height. And Jorge Mas was a very aggressive basketball player. He said, you can't take a shot if you don't get fouled, right? Like nobody takes a free shot. But he would always say, "Pass me the ball. You're a horrible shot," right? So, but anyway, it was this great experience that UM offered with all these folks that you and I grew up together. Xavier Cortada is still, making and producing art, and he's a fantastic guy. And he sort of got around. I think he found his calling. He wasn't a particularly great politician, but he was a good, conscientious community operator, and I think artist. And
he's always been an artist.
Yeah,
when he was at UM,
absolutely.
He was painting before UM.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you were at Mascanosa at the foundation, and then you went to. I read that you went to. From there, the Public Service Commission, but you had a stint actually under Obama in the Department of Energy too. For
I
3
did,
years or so?
but that was a while back. After that, but I ran the Cuban Exodus Relief Fund, which is the first private refugee resettlement. And so, as a guy who grew up in Westchester, not traveled much, and Jorge Mas hired me to process Cuban refugees that were stranded in 17 different countries.
Oh, really?
So I traveled the world for a long time, and I did that all through law school. You're not supposed to work and be a full-time law student, but I did both because Jorge needed me and I needed the money. And so I did that. And then when I finished that, a few years later, I took the post of executive director of the foundation after Jorge passed. And, I'd gone to the Public Service Commission, where I served for 6 years. Lawton Childs named me, and Jorge and a bunch of other people were very helpful, but Jorge Mas in particular was close to Lawton Childs, and so it made a very good introduction, and we were successful in that process. And then I came back because of Elian, right? Elian had been this devastating, it was it was this reality check of Cuban Americans and our place here, right? Elian had this very negative effect to some degree in perception. And it was, I'll never forget, we did this poll. We had this national poll, and we hired to see what people thought of Cuban Americans. It was fascinating. The further away you were from us, the more you liked us, right? So the further in the polling, if you were from Seattle, Washington, you thought, Cubans aren't too bad. But when you got to Broward, all the negative attributes would come out. And to some degree, it's this moment. And so I was hired to sort of help bring the organization into sort of the mainstream and to try to make it much more effective and to sort of rejigger it. And so I did that for 6 years, and then Obama. I ran for Congress and I lost, but it was a great race. I should have run a better race, but I am not a good politician either. And Obama named me to the Energy Department, which is a great gig. It wasn't very long, but it was a presidential appointee and it was Senate confirmed. So,
nice.
I got that off my resume as a politician. What do the Romans call it? The cursus honorum, as you went moving up.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it's how you moved up the system. And And then and I did that job for a while, and then I ran again. Eventually, I won a congressional seat again in a very tough district, which was my dream district, which is basically where I grew up. Westchester is at the time, the most, what would be the word? The most eastern, and the northern was basically 8th Street, and Westchester basically just all the way out into the Everglades and then all the way to Key West.
Who has that now? Anna Maria?
I think it's Jimenez. It's been
that's right. Anna Maria State. Sorry.
Jimenez has it. Chuck Jimenez has it, and it went all the way down there, and it was a great job. I mean, I enjoyed that too. I'm a history buff, and I've always followed history, so and I loved all the young people that worked with us, and so I did that for a while.
And tell me something, for someone who's never worked in Congress, what did you find in Congress that you were completely surprised about, that you did not expect?
I have to be honest. I'd worked around Congress. I had lobbied with Jorge Mas for many years, so I knew all these people. I think the worst part of it is the money part of it, right? Because you meet a lot of nice people that want to get involved in politics, and I of course encourage them. But money is the mother's milk of politics, and you need to be able to raise money, and you need to have a network. And I've seen wonderful people that can't do it. I've seen awful people that are very good at raising money, and the awful people tend to do better because if they can raise money. And Jorge Mas used to have a saying about Washington. He said, "There are a million good ideas in Washington, but only a few ideas have $1 million, and those tend to do better," right? And so the need for politicians to raise money is a horrible thing. And I can tell you all sorts of fanciful stories, but what you do in a district like I was in, you spend a good amount of your time raising money as opposed to reading transcripts or interviewing people, and it is brutal. Then again, it's still a great job, right? You're part of history, right? You turn on the radio, they're talking about what you're doing,
right,
or what happened, and you voted on those things, and things that you never, you open up a newspaper, and almost everything in that newspaper, to some degree or other, you've touched,
right,
and you've been part of, and that's a wonderful feeling.
And what years were you in Congress?
Oh, I was one term. So
what years?
It's
20.
I think it's 2014 to 15. I think it is. I think you got elected 16. At the end of 13, 14, 15.
Okay, all right. Do you have any plans to run again for anything?
No, I love the job. I just don't know if I've got the stomach for it anymore. And it's brutal, right? It's a lot of work, and people don't realize. You look at people who do this for a long time, and I really take off my hat to it, because as much as you may think that your ego drives you to do this, it is an incredible amount of work, and you're working all the time if you do it right. And if you're in a tough district, right? Some people are blessed with a wonderful district where you don't have opposition, your party controls, and usually when you're already the incumbent, no one attacks you in your own party. But when you're in a district like that district, where, let's see, since I left, there's been Curbelo, there's been Mercosal Powell, and now Jimenez. And in less than a decade, you've had 4 people there. Yeah. That is not something, that's a lot of work. And some people are able to do it with more panache. With me, it was a lot of work. I enjoyed it. I don't argue that I wouldn't argue that I wouldn't suggest it to people. I think everybody should have or do public service in one form or another. You don't have to be the candidate,
right? But
it's a wonderful view of how the system works.
And is there anybody here locally that you think doesn't get enough credit? That is maybe an elected official that is doing it right?
Listen, I think there are a lot of good elected officials. In fact, I think a lot of the people who do this do it for the right reasons. I think it's really hard. I don't argue that some people end up on the wrong side of the tracks, because it is if you're good at politics, you accumulate a great deal of power, and you watch a lot of people around you making a lot of money. But if you're doing politics to the degree that you're doing it, there are two ways out. You go completely broke, or they take you to jail, right? There's no middle ground. There's the intensity of it, the capacity to make. If you're making money at this, you're doing something that you're not supposed to be doing, because there's just no way to do it. The rules are designed for you to not make money, and so it's really hard. And part of the reason that I stopped doing it is that it's debilitating and it's hard on your family. And I think to some degree, you're doing it. You're doing it, but your family's going through it, right? Like it's water off my back when they say nasty things. In fact,
right.
I had a lawyer. He's a lawyer now, prominent lawyer in the city. He said, if someone doesn't hate you, you're not someone, right?
Okay, that makes sense.
People. If you're doing things, people hate you, but the people who really suffer it are the people around you, right?
Right.
Because they're helpless to help you. They watch this, and I know my daughter suffered it tremendously, right? She just, it bothered her to no end. Right?
Yeah, I read somewhere that like when you're in public office, your family basically are hostages, right? They're along for the ride, and there's somebody that they can use against you. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. So you obviously, and we talked earlier, you talk a lot about Cuba. You interviewed a lot. You get interviewed a lot in Spanish. So thank you for switching to English today. I did a lot of the Spanish ones during Regis House, and it's a lot easier in English, to be honest.
Yes.
But what do you think in Miami? You've been, involved here 40 some years, what do you think is the biggest threat, like coming to Miami, like say 20 years down the pike, or, or opportunity for Miami, because Miami's changing very fast?
No, listen, I think there are a lot of opportunities for the city. I do think, you mentioned it is so important to elect the right officials. And sometimes we assume that they're all equally bad. We assume, or as they all suck, or they are all bad, or they're all corrupt. And I've never found that. And I've been in politics most of my life. You look at a guy like Javi Fernandez here as a mayor of South Miami. This is a kid who doesn't need. And I call these people kids because I knew them growing up, right?
Yeah, me too.
I've known Javi 20 plus years. So, but obviously he's a man, and he's got a family, and he's a great mayor, taking
very
a city
very smart,
taking a city to the next level. And when he leaves his city, it's going to be richer, it's going to be better, it's going to provide more services, it's going to protect its taxpayers. That's what you want in leadership, right? You want people to sort of step up. That doesn't create a lot of friends, right? And the easy part is to make your friends rich and then leave and not leave a legacy. The hard part is to say, you've got an abandoned mall in the middle of a city, which is an eyesore. It's destroying the community sense. When you could have something that flowers and creates jobs, creates opportunities, it makes the city better and the services. And that's, a well-run city.
Right.
You look at a city like Pinecrest, Corradino, that whole crew there.
Yossi Galliano. Yeah. She's awesome.
She's a very good city manager. But those guys know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they've created a city. When that city was created, everybody said, it's a boondoggle, place for the rich. They're going to just increase taxes. No, they've increased property values. They give more services. They balance their budget. They have the most effective police of any city, and it works. And by the way, you have public policy that makes sense, as opposed to policy that retreats or policy that postures without having effect. And it is part of what, we live in this world that people are performative because of the TV, right? People, it's people get in front of a microphone and they say something that sounds perfectly rational, but of course has nothing to do about providing leadership. It is sort of this bland middleness of nothing, as opposed to saying, hey, this is the way we're going, right? You can follow, you can lead, but we've got to find a road. And I think a lot of times, as such a diverse community, right, you don't have people engaged, right? You'll have some crazy crank influencer who runs a recall for a bunch of stupid personal reasons, as opposed to running a recall because, hey, this person is ineffective and we need, for the city's future, we need to fix that.
Right.
You know, it's just like these bond issues. It gets harder and harder to pass bond issues because people come up with a crazy idea and sort of sell it. And, you know, bad news is, what is it? Bad news has traveled 1,000 miles while truth is just getting into the saddle, right? And in the world that we have today, you have this environment where everything, you can be cynical and skeptical and there's no control of it. And who produces, I'm sure this happens to you with your mom, but my parents, you know, the first 20 minutes of our morning breakfast is, you know, telling them what's not true that they saw. Well, I saw it on the internet, you know, and I said, Mom, I know you saw it on the internet. And in today's world, it's getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're missing that vehicle that used to be, you know, I don't know if you're old enough, but I remember Walter Cronkite, right? I remember this guy.
You're only 2 years older than me, remember?
I know, but I feel much older than that, right? But this idea, you see these things that make governance harder.
Right.
And on both sides, right? First of all, people figuring out. And so you need to develop people with credibility. You know, you know, I see it a lot. My wife is a much more successful politician than I am. You know, she got reelected twice. She's a
Tell us her name.
Anna Hokemer, who's the former council person of Pinecrest.
Right.
And, you know, that's what leadership looks like, right? People respect you, take a position. Maybe there's a little quadrant of the city that may not be happy, but as a general rule, they've created this very wealthy enclave that provides services for all its citizens in an effective manner. And we need that at all levels of government in Dade County. And many times we have a lot of politicians, you know, who are famous for some quirk, but they literally aren't making the city better. And and it makes our lives worse. And you're feeling it now, right? We're a city where infrastructure just can't keep up with our growth. But we've known that for a long time and we were fine with it. But we're getting to that point where the city sort of gridlocks several times a day.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that we don't have a plan, that there's not a mass transit plan, that some of the people who are involved with mass transit literally are working against mass transit. You know, it's a very scary thing because I think we all, you know, I'll give you the classic example, right? Building a metro mover to Miami Beach.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Well, we're out of time, but let's wrap up.
Go real quick.
Yeah.
I get it that the people on the beach don't want the unhuddled masses there, right? But the unhuddled masses coming to the beach is what makes the beach important. That everybody benefits from our beach, right? It is the crown jewel of attraction here. The Port of Miami, right? That is literally 300,000 jobs. The airport of Miami, almost 400,000 jobs. All three of those things need to be made better.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to get between them. And we need to figure out, like I lived on Pinecrest, so the Metro Rail was across the street. I'd never used Metro Rail, even though I was a kid. I literally worked building it. I was in construction, and I worked in those girders making them at the foundry where the cement was cast. That's an essential part of our city. Well, when you get on them, they're fantastic. We just need more of them because they don't take you anywhere.
Yeah. Well, listen, we could do another half hour just on transit, transportation. Thank you very much. You said half an hour is a long time, but it goes by really fast.
It does. And obviously you're a good interviewer, and I enjoyed the time, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for coming by. And if you can recommend anybody, you know, to come on here and talk about Miami.
If you can get my wife here. Anna is much better looking than I am and much smarter. So I think you'll do better.
Well, one of those I know for sure. Thank you very much,
Pleasure.
Former Congressman Joe Garcia. And join us next time in 2 weeks. We have a surprise guest, which means we haven't finalized our guest yet. We're booked through the summer, but in 2 weeks, we're still open on June 19th. Anyway, thank you for watching Localized Miami with our guest, former Congressman Joe Garcia. I'm Robert Ruano, and see you soon.